What's up, bankers?
Hello, bankers.
How is everybody doing?
Are you doing okay? Are you doing good? You know, this feed can be lots of different things, Matthew. You know, last week we had Luca from Love Island on. We're talking about breakups. We're talking about Love Island. We're talking about, you know, all things pop culture. But today, Matt, today we're journalists.
Well, I was under the impression that we are journalists. We are high profile people. We have an ESPN F1 editor on the podcast. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure this is exactly what's happening. He's actually here to interview us for his feature that he's doing on us.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, on ESPN. Was it 10,000 words? I think it was. 10,
they've been hounding us. They've been hounding us. Can we please do a profile? Can we please do a profile? What you guys are doing is so innovative. You're the new faces of Formula One. Can we please do a profile? And we're like, fine. And then, but you know what? Then he hopped on the Zoom. Didn't realize he was British. And you know, I'm feeling really safe now.
I'm confused, Nate. Why ESPN, an American company, would hire a British guy to run F1? Is ESPN trying to get banned from the Red Bull paddock as well?
Yeah. Well, hey guys, great to be on. First of all, I think it was a 20,000 word piece. I was under that impression.
Okay, so, but you have a deadline, so I mean,
right.
You can make it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I get that a lot, and I think the name Nate does put people off as well because that is it's more of a common name to hear Nate. So my full name's Nathaniel. Mm-hmm. That's not often shortened down to Nate in England. We kind of, we like to say posh full names like that. Yes. Whereas in America, you get Nate a lot more. Yes. So I think that when I do talk, I've actually been on Zoom calls before when I've started talking and I've seen the eyeballs kind of like bulge out of people's faces. Like, oh, this guy's English. And in America, it seems to go down really well. So, but no, I mean, our office is based in London. And, our F1 operation traditionally has run out of there. But obviously now, we kind of have this great interest from America with the TV deal, etc. So, there's a lot more American voices hopefully coming on. Hopefully not at the expense of me, but we'll see. I mean, time will tell, right? So, but no, I'm really excited to be on. I said to you guys just before we started, my TikTok feed is inundated with both of you, so it's really cool to be on.
A compliment, but we'll take it. You're just saying you show up a lot.
Inundated.
So that did sound.
I'm swarmed.
Yeah, it did. I saw Luca Bish on there last time, and I just had the email invite to come on. I was like, I don't know if I can follow up a guy from Love Island in terms of his chat, his look. So I'll try my best.
No one can.
But yeah.
So you're based in the UK?
I am, yeah. So I live just outside of London, and that's where we're based out of. And to be honest, a bit like all of the teams, it makes a lot of sense for F1 because obviously so much of the teams are all around London. A lot of the races are in Europe, so that was traditionally kind of why it was based there. But give it 5-10 years, and I think that's going to change a lot because America's kind of becoming the place for F1, as we'll talk about.
That's right.
And I mean, I love coming. I'm a huge NFL fan. I love American sports. So for me, it feels like it's a long time coming for this to be happening.
But why do so many British people hate that we're getting involved?
I don't know. Honestly, I find it confusing, and I think because I saw you guys would have seen that when Vegas was announced, right? Yes. Everyone was like, I can't believe they're going here.
Yeah.
And I mean, I kind of get it from the degree of you want to hold on to the classics like Spa and stuff like that.
Yes.
But what I always tell my friends who say that, I'm like, American fans want that as well. They don't just want to. They don't just want 20 races in America. They want to keep Spa. They want to keep these, these kind of classic races. But I've never understood it really. And we have a lot of races on a very good time zone for us. I saw one of my friends message me and said, "I can't believe I'm gonna have to get up early to watch this." I said, "Welcome to the rest of the world. How they watch F1. That's what they do." So I think it's just that. I think it's kind of it's a lot of people here still see it as a European sport. It's obviously racing started in Europe and. The most champions have been from Britain. You've got all these European drivers that have always been in there. So I think it's just kind of it's heritage and tradition. And to be honest, Americans kind of haven't always featured in Formula One racing, have they? It's always kind of been IndyCar, NASCAR. So I think there's kind of been, I would say, a bit of a snobbish kind of attitude to America's role in Formula One. So hopefully that's changing.
Right.
And I mean,
we're feeling it with Andretti a little bit. Now.
Yeah, exactly. Same as with the Vegas thing. The reaction I felt, if that had been like a French company or an English company, I don't think the reaction would have been the same as how people reacted to that.
Yeah. And it doesn't bother us that you have a Tom Brady jersey behind you. It doesn't bother us at all.
Yeah, well, I was going to get onto that. I can see it looming there behind me. In fact, I kind of forgot I had it there until I turned on the Zoom. That's actually been laughed at. So I'm a Buccaneers fan going back to 2006 because I played Madden. That was the only reason. And they had a pirate ship in their stadium. They had a running back called Cadillac Williams. And I used to love that, and that's the first team I played with. And I was like, this guy's called Cadillac Williams. He seems great. And I thought, I did my research. I looked on Google, and I was like, the Buccaneers just won a Super Bowl like 2 years ago. That must mean they're great. I didn't realize their team basically fell apart after that, and they were basically doomed for like 10, 15 years of being very bad. But a former F1 driver has laughed at this. So I interviewed Scott Speed years ago. I was doing a feature about the Red Bull program, and I just mentioned to him, obviously, for people probably know the name Scott, one of the greatest F1 names ever. Just throwing it out there. But when I told him I was a Buccaneers fan, he stopped the call for a second, called his wife over, and then put me on speaker and made me tell the story again because he found it so funny that an English guy with this accent supported the Buccaneers, who at the time were dreadful. This is before Brady.
Is Madden like the Drive to Survive of football for people like abroad, where they're like, oh my God, Michael Vick is so good in this game. I guess I'm a Falcons fan.
Honestly, it is. It is because it's such a fun game to play. Especially if you're uninitiated to the rules of NFL, you're kind of like, I don't understand this, but I just want to throw it downfield.
Yeah,
and you slowly pick up the rules of the game like that. So that was it for me. And I've got friends who are Packers fans and Cowboys fans and stuff like that. And I was always kind of the odd one out saying I'll support the Buccaneers. So it is kind of like that. I'd never considered it, but that is kind of for us. That is the way in. That a lot of people had my age.
Stick to Formula One.
Yeah, that's right.
Stick football fans.
Stick to rugby.
Yeah.
Stick to rugby.
Okay. No more international games in London. Stop taking our sport away. That's what Americans would be saying.
We don't send our best. We send Jacksonville a lot, I think.
Yeah, that is true.
We send you the dregs.
I saw Jacksonville v. the Ravens a few years ago. Forget the year, but it was two backup quarterbacks. It was a dreadful game.
Oh, you didn't even get Lamar?
No, this was a few years before Lamar. So it was. I remember a tight end called Mercedes Lewis scored 3 touchdowns. I don't think he did anything ever again. That's all I remember from the game. It was good fun.
You're
but
a true
I remember
F1
thinking,
yeah.
I remember thinking we've been shortchanged a bit. I was like, this isn't the NFL I see on TV every so often.
Well, you're a true F1 fan because you keep gravitating towards these NFL players with car names. Because we got Cadillac Williams, we got Mercedes Lewis. Well, you know what? I want to get into, speaking of Cadillac, speaking of America, speaking of these two worlds, the North America and Europe combining. What is going on with Cadillac and Andretti Racing, the FIA, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, and these team owners? I mean,
it's a clusterfuck. We have a lot to talk about.
We do have a lot to talk about.
We do. A lot to unpack, as they say. And to be honest with you, I'd be fascinated to know what you guys have made of it, watching it from the outside, because it feels like this is going to be the big storyline of the season. Because we've got this kind of, you'd mentioned it there, this kind of clusterfuck situation of F1 on one side with the teams kind of allied around them, and then the FIA increasingly. I don't know if you guys noticed last year, but a bit of tension. It was pretty obvious how that was growing, wasn't it, through the year? And this seems to be like where the battleground is going to be, because the FIA wants an 11th team. We heard those 10 teams last year say, well, we don't think you're going to really bring anything to the table, which is interesting, because how on earth do you quantify that before they're in racing, and what are you expecting them to bring to the table? It's very, very much teams looking after their own self-interests in one sense. So I think it's going to rumble on. And the FIA, one of the reasons F1 responded in the way they did, or there's been a lukewarm reaction to it, is F1, as they say, have had a few teams show interest. So they were almost trying to kind of not push away the Andretti Cadillac entry, but almost say like, yeah, this looks great, but we have others, I think that's going to be the interesting thing, is who are these others? What's the money behind them? And I think basically what they're going to want is they're going to want the most secure team to join, a team that can compete fairly close to the top of that budget cap, isn't in 3 years' time going to be saying, actually, we're going to leave because we can't actually do this.
Right.
So there's a lot going on, but like you said, it's just playing out in a really strange way. And I think the tweet that Ben Sulayem put out was on January the 2nd. So he'd obviously seen in the new year and thought, right, let's just light a tinder a fuse
Twitter
and
fingers
just
turn to trigger fingers.
yeah,
trigger
yeah.
fingers into
Just
trigger
like
fingers.
throwing this grenade out and being like, let's
Okay.
just see where this goes.
So yeah, no. F1 is more like they're treating it more like Love Island. They see all these bombshells. They're telling their partners like they want to get to know everyone in the villa. But I think I want to take a minute to I don't know where to start first between there's two things I really want to talk about, which is the division between the FIA and F1 and the teams and how that works. And then there's also I want to talk about Mohammed Ben Sulayem.
Yeah.
So I guess let's just figure out, can you explain to our listeners, like, because we come from the NFL and we come from the NBA where everything's sort of integrated. Like the people that make the rules are also the people that, the commissioner, the person who is in charge of making the rules and judiciating or whatever the word, governing the league is hired, works for the NFL. The NFL it's all one entity. Right.
And he works for the owners.
He works for the owners.
Hired by the owners.
It's all integrated. Same thing with the NBA. And then you have the Players Association, which is a union on the other hand, but it's all much simpler. And here you have like the sports league, or I guess marketing arm of Formula One, and then you have the regulatory body, which is a completely separate entity. And then you have these teams, and it seems very messy, and I was hoping you could help our listeners understand how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is one of the things that I've noticed a lot of fans when they come in have really been surprised about, because effectively what you've got with F1 is it's a sport that doesn't make its own rules, in the sense of it doesn't make the rules by which it's, it is policed by. So, when a driver forces another driver wide, they're not seeing Formula One stewards. They're going to see FIA stewards. And then the F1 teams are kind of like, okay, well, we disagree with how that's gone down. So you effectively have this giant, big organization, the FIA, founded in France. That was kind of the dawn of motor racing. And Formula One has, become the kind of pinnacle event or pinnacle series there, but is racing within the FIA. So it's a bit like FIFA. We just had the World Cup in soccer. You've got FIFA as the governing body, and those teams kind of all partake in a World Cup that is run by them. That's the closest comparison I can see. The difference being
works so well.
Right, yeah, exactly. Famously works like clockwork, and there's never any problems or any controversies or any corruption or anything like that. Yeah. And so over time, you've had different power struggles. There's a great documentary on Netflix about Max Mosley, who was head of the FIA a long, long time ago, and his kind of relationship with Bernie Eccleston, who used to be F1 boss. It would fluctuate. They'd be very good friends, and they'd kind of fall out over issues. But between them, they kind of had this really kind of symbiotic relationship almost, where they both understood that they had to coexist with each other to survive. Since then, things have changed quite a bit. We had Jean Todt, who kind of oversaw Michael Schumacher's era at Ferrari when he dominated. He became president, had a few terms in charge. And increasingly what you're seeing now that F1 is becoming so popular in its own right, I think that Liberty Media have come in, spent a lot of money to buy Formula One, which they did in 2017, 18, I forget now the year. And I've very quickly realized, and I don't know whether you've banned talk of 2021 Abu Dhabi on this podcast, but I think when they saw how that went
at all.
I think when they, but imagine if you had just bought a championship a few years before, and you're looking at it and you're saying, this is the most exciting championship we've had in years. It's probably going to go down as the greatest season, in my opinion, that I've ever seen in my life. And, it might be the best ever. And it all comes down to a mistake. The championship is decided by a mistake by an employee who's not a Formula One employee. He's not a referee like an NFL referee. He's not, a FIFA. Sorry, he's not like a World Cup referee who is represented by the World Cup. He works for a separate entity to Formula One.
It's
so
crazy.
Liberty Media. So that's kind of where I think things have changed. And under Bernie, he kind of knew, he's like, this is just the way things work, and it was always the way. And Eccleston, for all of his faults, and he's got plenty of those, he was very smart in how he built Formula One and how he kind of, I think he let the FIA get away with a lot, or not even get away with a lot. He put up with a lot from the FIA and said, that's fine, because we have to, the two of us have to exist together.
But why does Formula One need the FIA is I guess the question.
Yeah, and I think that's a question that F1 teams increasingly asking themselves now. And I think what was so fascinating about kind of the end of 2021 and the start of 22 was that Abu Dhabi went down. So it was a massive, massive mistake made by an FIA employee. Jean Todt then leaves his role and a new president comes in. And I think that this is almost a perfect storm of kind of, of if these two things had happened separately, I don't think it would have been as big an issue. But Ben Sulayem's come in and immediately has kind of, I think he's picked the wrong kind of fights. Like there was the jewelry stuff last year. He's now had this thing with, saying you need written permission now if you want, if you want to make any personal statements, stuff like that. And you
there's
talk
the
to people
award ceremony.
Yes, exactly.
He likes the spotlight. This guy, this bureaucrat likes the spotlight.
I think there's this confusion, this thing that doesn't kind of quite add up to me, which is that an FIA employee made this decision that really kind of felt like it was almost an F1, that it was a decision that almost that F1 would want, because that
with Michael Massey?
With Michael Massey, it ended in this like kind of slutty, exciting way that you would think that the governing body would be the people being like, no, we stick to the rules, but instead it was the governing body being like, no, let's make this fun. Yeah. And then at the same time, there's this new thing where like now that the FIA is like, let's bring in a new team. This sounds great. And the FIA and F1 is saying, no, we actually don't want this. And this is kind of like would expect
the roles are swapped.
It feels like the roles are swapped, that the FIA should be the ones who are kind of like the nerds saying, no, that actually isn't how things are done. And F1 is like, no, let's bring in more teams. We want more revenue, all this stuff. Like this disconnect is it doesn't make sense.
The only advantage to having an outside company, an outside entity governing you is for objectivity, because the problem with NFL or NBA is they're always going to go for the entertainment. They're always going to be leaning towards entertainment, like with the superstar calls with LeBron James or Trey Young or James Harden, because that's because they're there because they know that's
they're there for the profit. They're there for the entertainment side of it. And you would expect that the FIA are like at the Oscars when they hire the accounting firm, to not fuck up the fucking La La Land,
which never happened. Exactly.
Which never happened. But
So I guess where's the power with the Why does FIA
what's
have
the
all this
struggle?
power?
What's this power struggle?
So I think, and sorry if I'm not answering the questions properly, because I think I'm as confused about it as I've ever been now looking at it as a journalist, and I think that this is the interesting thing, is that I think the main question that's going through everyone's heads now is exactly what you asked, is why does F1 need the FIA? And I think that, Stefano Domenicali's come in and he's got so many ideas he wants to do. One of the really interesting battlegrounds at the moment is sprint races. Formula One is like, we want these sprint races. The FIA are like, well, and it's like, how many are we going to have? We're going to have 3, we're going to have 5. Behind the scenes, there's a tug of war going on there, because ultimately that comes down to what the FIA wants to do. The FIA is making these rules, they're the ones who ratify the engine rules, etc. And I think Formula One has got to the point where it says we could exist on our own if we needed to. We would be fine. The money's here. And like you say, in NFL, there's no gray area there. And I think if Formula One, I'm not saying they are going to break away, but that is the end point if they were to fall out. And that is one very, very dramatic path they could go down. I think the question would increasingly be, can F1 survive on its own without this? And I think that the biggest thing that Formula One is probably looking at the teams.
What is this?
Sorry,
I don't understand what FIA does other than be the hall monitors.
That's effectively what they are. It's hall monitors. It's overseeing regulations. I suppose one of the big things they do is they homologate all the cars together. So Formula 2, Formula 3 cars, there are massive regulations around what those have to look like. Right. There's obviously the super license system, which has obviously been criticized, but that was kind of brought in because series like F1 was saying there's too many pay drivers coming in. Right. So it was, brought in to be like, well, let's get them a bit more experience.
So there's a whole infrastructure of human beings that are sort of doing all
this
work.
There's loads.
Yeah.
And then it also seems to be my understanding that the Formula One leases the championship. Like
basically,
there is FIA actually owns the championship.
Absolutely. And that's why Max doesn't get his championship until that gala event. If it was a Formula One championship, he would win it, and Formula One would say, I've spoken to people at Formula One, in different departments, and they say one of the biggest frustrations they have obviously a great moment in the Super Bowl, the World Cup is the winner wins the match.
Yeah,
they hold the trophy aloft. Max won it in Japan eventually when we worked out he'd won it,
Right.
and then
and then instead of getting a trophy, was forced to sit in an awkward chair.
Yeah, but again, that rule that was what was fascinating about that as well, is that the FIA felt like they'd clarified that well enough, and then F1 were like, well, hang on, you guys are telling us he's not champ, we think he is. And then the FIA came out and they said to us and they said to Formula One, it's like, no, you guys just didn't read the rules properly. And it's like, well, I'm sorry, but we didn't, the assumption was that this would be communicated better. So that was a great example as well. And so Max waits 4 or 5 races, whatever it is, to get his championship at an FIA event, which again, I think has become a bit of a battleground in terms of the FIA wanting to kind of stamp its authority and say, we still own you. We still own this championship. Increasingly teams are frustrated.
Awkward ceremony where Mohammed Ben Sulayem is going to get drunk and treat it like the Michael Scott's Dundies. But
the Dundies is a great comparison because that's what I felt watching it. Yeah, and when that whole thing with Horner on stage was just, I mean, it was hilarious, but it was so painful. And Domenicali's there, like, I've got to stop this. This is, he's like trying to jump in at the right moment, and it was quite a good metaphor for what's going on at the moment, I think.
And then, of course, to attention, doesn't it? But it speaks to like if that's a underlying tension, if this is like the subtext of these interactions is kind of this growing tension of maybe like the Christian Horners of the world being like, I actually don't need to fucking listen to you. Like, I actually don't need you anymore. So on some level, to me, I'm like thinking dramatically about this. If I'm like writing a script or this thing's happening, like the underlying growing tension of this thing is this feeling of like, the teams being like, we actually don't fucking need you, like F1 being like, we don't need you anymore, and then him getting drunk and embarrassing him to try to like be like, no, like I'm still top dog here, like you're still beneath me.
And that's like, if you watch the NBA, you watch the NFL, soccer, it's like all about the stars. Nobody cares about the fucking referee. The referee, unless it's WWE and the referee comes, unless we're talking about WWE and he takes out a chair and he hits somebody, which would be entertaining. Honestly, what happened in Abu Dhabi was Michael Massey became the special referee.
Yeah, but so that's Michael Massey's music playing suddenly out of nowhere.
But okay, so and then of course he creates more hot water with the so I want to talk quickly about the political statements.
Yes,
because it's just like he's just writing these edicts like he's this king. He's like, okay, I'm like, well, doesn't Formula One want to weigh in on? Doesn't Formula One have probably an opinion? Are they working hand in glove on a statement of like, hey, the FIA is saying that Formula One drivers can't make political statements without prior authorization?
I don't think we're going to hear about that until we see the car launches and testing, for the simple reason that I don't know if F1 teams know how serious the FIA is about what exactly you get for breaking that rule. So is it a slap on the wrist? Is it kind of a cursory, hey, look, Lewis, if you're going to wear a Pride helmet, please let us know and we'll say that's fine. We just want to know so we're not surprised. Or is it them saying, a bit like FIFA did with the England team and a few other teams, no, you can't wear that because it's got the Pride flag on it. And if you wear it, you can get booked before you even take the field. Like, how draconian is it? And I think that the teams are trying to work that out.
Yeah.
But absolutely, I think that they will turn around and say, well, we don't think that's right. And again, this comes down to who makes the rules. It's still FIA, it's still the F1 championship, but the FIA ultimately is the one that can hand that down. And again, when it comes to sporting and it comes to sporting penalties in terms of, are you going to dock a driver 10 points, 15 points? Is that a grid penalty, whatever? Those aren't F1 penalties. Those are FIA penalties given to F1 drivers. Okay. So again, this is where it kind of becomes almost like a little civil war kind of thing, where F1, as good as it is, as popular as it's become, it isn't as powerful as you might think. And I think that is going to become a bigger and bigger issue as we get into this season, next season. And just sorry to keep waffling on about this, but that's why the Bernie Mosley thing was so important, because those two guys got on so well together. They worked together for about 30 years, and there was an understanding between them that, like, look, let's help each other out here. Sometimes. But that doesn't exist now. That goodwill doesn't really exist. And Ben Sulayem as well, like, one of the things he does that's hilarious behind the scenes, he always brings up the fact that he's like a 15-time Middle Eastern rally champion. And a lot of the guys there are like, I don't care. it's like you're talking to like Christian Horner or Toto Wolff, who have won multiple Formula One championships. And then this guy's coming in with Jean Todt, he could say, look, his record spoke for itself. Was this guy's come in, and I think there's a bit more of a kind of, okay, who are you and why are you being
let's
so
get
draconian
into who
like
he
this?
is. He won a bunch of Middle Eastern rallies, according, and he likes to remind us of that. I looked him up on Wikipedia. There's not a lot to him other than he's a motorsport enthusiast, and he owns 20 he owns like all these hypercars. He collects them, which is just a fancy word for like you're rich and you buy them. So
they're
exactly. Not like butterflies.
He doesn't find them. And say I'm collecting them. Like they're just. He's like, oh, there was another hypercar at the end of my garden.
If you give me $1 billion, I can collect them too.
This isn't Pokemon. This isn't Pokemon Go.
Yeah, right. Him and his friends are trading hypercars together.
I hate that for you. Buy hypercars.
Right.
So he's a fucking rich guy. So I'm sorry, but I see an Emirati bajillionaire running this sport, and I can't help but kind of ruling with an iron fist, cracking down on sort of political speech. And I can't help but draw a direct parallel to FIFA. Am I wrong?
No, I think FIFA's a great comparison. And look how Infantino, the president of FIFA, conducted himself around the World Cup. I mean, he had that insane speech beforehand, where he said, I'm African, I'm a migrant worker. I don't know if you which was just when I first read that, I was like, this is clearly somebody, making a joke on Twitter. He hasn't actually said this. And you realized, oh my God, he actually did. But that's kind of where you're at. You've got this guy who I think has got this inflated sense of importance. He's got a very important role, but I think that having a powerful role and having authority are very different things, aren't they? You can have all the power in the world. If people don't respect the power that you have, then your power doesn't really mean a lot. And I think that's kind of where his problem is, because he doesn't seem like an F1 man. And so his initials, we in shorthand terms will say, let's say I've got a WhatsApp chat with a few journalists who I sit with. I'll be like, who's going to the MBS session?
Oh Jesus, you call him MBS?
Yeah, which is unfortunate as well, because obviously, but it's just the shorthand. And we noticed that. We're like, we got to stop saying that. So somebody said, let's just call him Must Be Seen, because he always gets himself. It's like he must be seen in every environment. There's a photo shoot, there's a new initiative. Ben Sulayem's there, in the background, and he's like, I want to take ownership of this from the FIA. And I think that's become quite noticeable now. People have said this guy turns up for a race weekend. We see him on Sunday. He'll walk to the front of the grid, and a lot of people will say he gets his photo opportunity and then he leaves. And I think you notice that more and more now. So, and again, he has the right to be there as the guy leading the governing body. But if you keep doing that and people are wondering what you're doing there, I think it erodes your authority quite a bit. So yeah.
How is he what's the hiring process for him?
Yes.
Like, how did he get into this position? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, and that's kind of murky as well. So it's always an election, but the amount of times they're uncontested elections is amazing. Jean Todt, if I remember correctly, he had one where somebody stood against him, and then two where miraculously no one stood against him. And it was kind of, that's not really an election then, is it? That's kind of just I'm staying, a bit like DiCaprio in that film where he's like, I'm staying around.
Right.
I'm not going nowhere.
Yeah.
I'm not fucking leaving. I'm not fucking leaving.
And I think that the thing with FIFA, sadly, is a really good comparison, because there's so many kind of lifers at FIFA, people that have worked for the company for a long, long time, worked for that governing body for ages. They're doing favors. They're making sure that they stay in people's good graces. So when a vacancy comes up, it's like, well, the guy I'm voting for is Ben Sulayem. So that's where that's come from. He's not had some genius idea. He's not, he didn't pioneer Halo. It's not like he said, here's what I did before, so vote for me on the back of that. He's just been at FIFA. He's just been there for a long time and has kind of garnered favor for that reason.
He's a company man.
How many Middle East rallies he's won?
Yeah,
Stop it.
Yeah.
Stop it.
If he'd won 16 championships, I'd give the guy the respect. But it's only 15. I mean, come on.
So I'm still a bit like within the protesting stuff. It just I'm still having trouble being like, what's the vested interest in the FIA for these various things in terms of like it just seems like what the FIA is most interested in is profit, which is like in terms of the profit structure of what they take in from F1. It's like, does the FIA benefit greatly from them doing races in like these various kind of
Dhabi,
controversial places where they're
Jeddah.
getting paid
Yeah.
seemingly shit tons of money, and like Aramco deals, like is the FIA getting that money? Is that what's, do they have a financial stake to gain from all this stuff?
Yeah, I think I mean, that money ultimately is going into different pots. You know, the FIA is getting that money, and then some goes back to the team, some's going back to the championship. You know, there's prize money then at the end of that.
Right.
And if you notice when it comes to the Middle Eastern races, and Vegas had the same thing, a lot of the European races will get a 2-year contract extension, a 3-year contract extension. Bahrain, Saudi, Qatar, when they sign deals, it's 10 years, 15 years, because they have so much money that they can throw at these things. And if you're Monaco, you know, everyone wants Monaco. A lot of people want Monaco to stay. Some people aren't so bothered about it. But races like Monaco and Spa, at the moment, the F1 and the FIA look at those races and they say, there's no way they can guarantee they'll still be here, you know, still be able to produce this money in 5 years from now. There's no doubt about that with Qatar, with Bahrain, etc. So suddenly you get a situation exactly what FIFA had with Qatar at the World Cup, where these guys have paid all this money for this event, and they would rather not have the Pride logo everywhere, all over their product. Suddenly it becomes, for the FIA, it becomes, well, these are the guys paying the money. These are the guys who are kind of pushing this champion there, and they can go to the teams as well, and they can say, look, these guys, if these guys move away, the prize fund might go down. You know, if this money stops being here, we can't command the same kind of money from a Vegas, from a South Africa, etc. So I think that's where it becomes difficult for F1 teams, because they look at it, and as we said with Andretti, there's this kind of vested interest of, at the end of the day, they're being paid money to compete in Formula One, and the less money that's around, the less, especially for some of those smaller teams, the less money they're going to be making.
I mean,
so it gets very complicated.
The truth is like when you get into bed with certain countries that have a political agenda, then you sort of, and you take that money, then you sort of are kind of forfeiting, maybe you're right, at speaking freely, because I mean, is that sort of what we're getting down to? Is, I mean, I'm not, like, if I was NBA, Must Be Seen's defender, and I'm not, but if I was him, I'd say, look, you know, we've decided to race in these places that are, you know, that don't fuck with some of these things that you're talking about.
Yeah, right.
So if we decide to take their money, we can't go into their country and say X, Y, and Z. So that's just that's the deal that we made.
And Saudi last year was a great example. Remember when there was that, and it wasn't a protest, but it was obviously that missile attack just down the road from the facility.
Right.
Now, in any other world, in any other scenario, they would have said, right, look, let's go home.
Right.
Let's not race here.
Yeah.
Because we just don't know, you know, this is a volatile situation. We don't know what's going on. You know, it was clear from the reporting that we did, and that, you know, the news that came out after, that the drivers weren't happy.
You were there? Were you there?
I wasn't there. My colleague was there.
Okay.
And drivers were telling him, team bosses were telling him, like, we want to be on the next flight out of here.
Right.
But
how many of the drivers? What percentage of the drivers would you say?
I think it was over half of them. And that's the ones we spoke to. There wasn't an appetite. You know, a lot of them are saying, like, look, you know, it's not like we've come all this way for a once in a lifetime race. Like, this is going to be here next year.
Right.
But right now,
they cancel for rain. Why wouldn't they cancel?
Right. And the fascinating thing with that, and I think it showed you where the power now is going to be in Formula One, was there was never a suggestion from F1 that race was not going ahead. They were like, no, of course we're going ahead. And if it had been a race not paying that same money, I don't think that would have happened in a million years. And like and let's compare that to Belgium, Spa. when that got rained off. They
screwed everybody. They stood out.
And that that had a big impact in the Lewis v Max fight, didn't it? Because they had half points, and it could have. I'm not saying it did impact the championship, but one of those guys could have won that race, the other could have not finished, whatever. But that was a no-brainer. They were like, well, we can't reschedule it to Monday, so we're just done. Like we.
And all those people lost their money.
Yeah, and it's difficult to compare. Like I hate whataboutism, and that's kind of a loose comparison, but it just shows you that the first thought there was, well, don't worry about the fans. we'll let Spa refund that, and then Spa were like, I think it's F1. F1 were like, well, maybe it's the FIA should refund you. The FIA were like, well, maybe it's Spa that should. But when it came to Saudi, it was like, no, we have to have this race because there's so much money involved here. It's a big event for them. We've moved them to the top end of the calendar to kind of move them away from Abu Dhabi, because it was Abu Dhabi, Qatar, and Saudi in close proximity last year. So they said, let's space us out a bit more.
Yeah, let's
So I
make
think
it a
it just came.
disaster for travel.
Yeah, exactly. So it kind of showed you, when the chips are down, money ultimately. I mean, Lewis said it, didn't he, just before COVID? He said cash is king. And I think that sadly, that's not just an F1 thing. That's kind of becoming a thing across sports, sadly. But I think we're seeing it more and more, especially with these Middle Eastern races. And hopefully Lewis kind of looks at that rule that they've brought in and just says, look, I'm not respecting this. He kind of did the same with the jewelry thing, didn't he? He was very much like, okay, look, I mean, I can cover this up, but I can't take this out just in a day because you want me to. This, the ear study had. And I don't know about you guys, but the reference that he had another piercing seemed to just be almost to kind of embarrass the FIA, because as far as I'm aware, he doesn't. Not that I've seen proof or anything. But the suggestion in the paddock is that he did just have the one, but he kept bringing this other one up because it became awkward for people to talk to him about it. They were like, so.
He's saying, hey, the FIA, you want to look at my cock?
Yeah, it's like how far are you going to go with this? Like, do you really want to see? Like, he's like, I'm a 7-time world champion, and you really want to go here? Like, is this how petty you're going to get? But so hopefully he does similar with this rule, and not just him. I mean, I hope because I think you get to this territory of when LeBron was told, "Shut up and dribble," don't you? A few years ago.
Yeah.
And in that instance, what was interesting was the NBA came out, and because that was made, if I'm not mistaken, was made on a news show, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was
a woman on Fox News.
That's right. And then the NBA came out and said, no, we support LeBron's right to talk. So that is a really interesting comparison.
Unless it's about China. China.
Whoa.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, China's where the money is.
It speaks
exactly.
It speaks to that same thing. But what the NBA and what the NBA has done that I think other, like even in America has been so effective is they've kind of stood with their players for certain various things. But there was a line that was drawn when it came to China.
And again, kind of money.
Yeah,
of
course,
kind of supersedes everything else. So I don't know. It's kind of sad to see that happening across sports, but I think sadly now, as a fan, you kind of have to look at it and you almost have to stomach it, which is awful. But you just kind of have to be like, well, the power and the money is so big now. It's guiding all these decisions in a way that it wasn't 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Does the FIA kind of give a shit about the other things that it governs, or is F1 now become like well, I mean, it's like they govern so much. There's so many racing leagues that is under the umbrella of the FIA, but it seems like, are any of them bringing in even like a hundredth, a thousandth of what F1 brings in?
Oh, in terms of money, no. But actually, to the FIA's credit, they do look after a lot, and they, from what I can tell, they look after it in a pretty good way. They look after a lot of rallying championships, and to the what they've been great at is spearheading. The FIA were the ones who kind of pushed for the halo to come in. They said this is mandatory. We're not discussing this. This is coming in. So in terms of safety, they have a really good kind of motivation and mindset on that. So I don't want people listening to this thinking I'm just kind of dumping all over the FIA, but that comes from that. But that's kind of what you would expect a governing body to do, isn't it? Take that bigger role of looking at safety and looking at the junior categories and saying, this is kind of what we do. We'll leave you guys to it. Whereas actually what they're doing is they're being quite micromanagey when it comes to Formula One on top of all those other things they're doing. So you can almost argue that if you're Formula One, you're thinking these guys are kind of overstepping the mark a little bit, despite the fact that they clearly do some good stuff behind the scenes. Are they infringing a bit too much into what Formula One kind of wants to be doing?
But then I think, is Formula One getting off a little bit too easily off the hook with this thing? Because it's not like it's not like the FIA is like, we have to race in Qatar, and Formula One's like, no, we don't want that 10-year deal for $150 million. It's like they're in there as well.
This political speech thing is a result of where they've chosen to race.
Yeah, 100%. And it's Aston Martin, isn't it, who have the Aramco sponsorship, which is so tied in with Saudi. So you're right. I mean, you can't bite the hand that feeds you ultimately. Right. And so increasingly, the more you kind of go down this route, the harder it is to kind of do a 180 and say, actually, we don't want to do this. And I always feel for the drivers, to be honest, because a lot of the time they say, well, if they don't want to race, that they shouldn't race. It's like, well, it's not that simple. Those guys have a contract to race for their team for 24 races a year. If Lewis just turned around and said, I'm not racing at this race, I'm pretty sure Mercedes would say, okay, well, we think you've breached your contract there. We could probably let you go. So drivers probably could make more of a stand about it, but really, I don't know if they have the power in that situation. I think you're right. The power comes from the people making decisions at the FIA, but also there's some influential people, in F1 as well, team bosses, Stefano Domenicali, etc. And these things have kind of
the FIA doesn't book the races, do they?
Well, no, this is one of those things. So the discussions will be with Stefano Domenicali, the head of F1. Right. But the calendar still gets ratified by the FIA. So it's almost like, so over here in England, we have our parliament, but we also have the House of Lords next to it, which is basically where all the laws go to get ratified. Yeah. And they very rarely will reject something outright, but it still goes there to be looked at, to be fine-tuned. Sometimes they'll send it back and say, you need to reword this. This isn't extensive enough, etc. And it goes back to them again. And so that's a loose comparison, but I think that's what the FIA does when it comes to picking venues. F1 will say, here's why we want to race here. The FIA will say, how much money are they bringing in? Why is this better than these options here that you've got? Where's it going to go in the calendar? Because we need to ratify this calendar. The FIA will release that calendar and say, here it is. So it kind of, again, that's why it is confusing to people, because you look at it and there's kind of two steps to it. It's like a two-stamp system. And
there's the teams, right? Stefano Domenicali doesn't work for the teams like Roger Goodell works for the NFL teams.
No, right, exactly. I mean, they all sign up for the Concord Agreement, which is what binds them to the sport for, I think, until, on this occasion, I think it's until 26. But that's always kind of what's put to the teams, is like, if you didn't like this, you signed the Concord Agreement, which says, here are the terms to compete, here's the money, here's how the TV revenue is going to go. So they don't work for Domenicali, but they kind of work under a term of a contract that they have effectively written out and signed. So there's almost that there. They couldn't just turn up one day and say, we don't want to do this anymore, because they'd turn around and say, well, unless I'm mistaken, this is your contract. So your name on this contract here that you've bound yourself and your team to until the end of it.
It just seems like if I'm a billionaire, I'd much rather have an NFL team, an NBA team, a Premier League team than an F1 team, because I don't have the same control over things.
And it's so expensive to get involved in F1. I mean, Toto Wolff last year said something like it'll cost you $1 billion just to establish yourself in Formula One. Obviously, there's the budget cap, but you need facilities. You need you need to, all of those things you need to do just before you even get to racing. There's so much there, and he might that number may have been inflated because Toto was trying to put off somebody like Andretti coming in. So you have to take it with a pinch of salt. But I don't think that is. It's not like it's wildly wrong, that figure. If it is slightly inaccurate, it's probably a good ballpark figure, because it's such an expensive venture, and that's why the involvement of General Motors, of Cadillac, is interesting, because the question is, how much are they going to actually put into that?
Yeah, well, right, so let's go into that.
Yeah, well, it's easier to say, like, with an NBA team or an NFL team, like, okay, we add this team in Seattle, or we add this team in Montreal, or we add, how big is the city? How big is the fan base? Like, you can actually quantify the value. Like, everyone's like, of course Seattle should have a team. Seattle's huge. They would bring in a lot of money, bring in a lot of attention. That would be a net gain. That's worth diluting the pool. But it's kind of hard to say what Andretti and Cadillac, like how big the fan base of those that race team and those cars are. I mean, is there any team that you could easily say, okay, that's a net positive? Is it maybe Porsche? I know people are obsessed with Porsche.
Yeah, I think this whole discussion about teams is interesting. So one thing I debate with my colleague at ESPN, Lawrence Edmondson, but also a few others, is if Ferrari was to quit Formula One, I know it'd obviously be a sad day, but oh wow, Ferrari's left. But some people suggest if Ferrari left, that Formula One would cease to be, fans would leave, in drones. And I don't think that's true. I think that a lot of people would be very, very disappointed Ferrari had left. I would be. I grew up as a Ferrari fan. But when the first race of the year came around, I think I'd be like, all right, well, there's still a Formula One race on. I want to see who the best team is. And I think that's where that's why the Netflix experiment has been so interesting from that perspective, is because I think what people have been drawn to is the people, not the brands, not the cars.
Right.
And so that, I don't think Andretti joining, you're absolutely right, Matt. it's not like suddenly all these people who are like never F1ers were like, now I'm coming in because Andretti's there, and I'm just a big stan for the Andretti family.
I
It's
own
kinda
an
like-
Escalade, so I'm gonna
Yeah,
watch.
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
It's also Cadillac. Cadillac's a kind of a bizarre choice because it's not. They've never been. I've never been like, oh, Cadillac. That's a fast car.
Yeah.
Cadillac is
Right.
luxury. It's
Yeah.
luxury.
It's
Yeah.
comfort.
Yeah, it's comfort.
And like, because the thing with to go back to the Ferrari example is an interesting one, because as much as it's a great brand, it's not like you wake up and think I can definitely own a Ferrari. I watch Formula One, and then I think, you know what I'm going to do today is I'm going to buy that Ferrari I've always
They
wanted.
won't let you.
Because well, that's it as well. But so I don't know, and Ferrari hasn't been winning championships for so long, and viewership's gone up. It's not like they've been doing badly and it's gone down. So I think that the argument about what Andretti and Cadillac can bring, I think actually the argument in terms of, I don't think it's so much fan bases. I think it's sponsorship. I think it's money. I think it's awareness. You have Cadillacs coming in. Suddenly you have, I mean, not that Formula One's struggling right now for sponsorship, but you bring in General Motors, and suddenly you've got that entire company is now like, so much of our focus, marketing, energies is going towards promoting what we have there. You know, we want to bring businesses in who their partners are suddenly interested in, you know, in working in F1. Their new partners are suddenly like, hey, this is great now. So it almost makes General Motors, it makes Andretti very, very much more valuable.
We're
I
unclear.
don't know whether it makes Formula One massively more valuable, if I'm honest with you.
But Toto,
right.
But they're saying, and it's funny with it, but nobody. It's like that meme where it's like nothing. Mohammed Ben Sulayem, like it's like nobody says anything, and then he's like, well, actually,
yeah,
and he was like,
yeah,
well, I don't understand why they're getting so much pushback. And it's like nobody said anything publicly anyway. And I've been getting, there's been sort of like thoughts that Cadillac might just be like the label, they might just be labeled Cadillac,
badge.
like
right.
Alpha, like Sauber was labeled Alfa Romeo, and Alfa Romeo doesn't supply them engines. They don't do shit for them other than
and no fan is tuning in and being like, man, the only reason I watch this is because I can see that Alfa Romeo logo lap after lap.
Right.
A lot of people probably think, oh, that's great that Alpha's in. That's pretty cool. I know Alpha. You know, I recognize them, but I don't think it's drawing you in the same way that, you know, you watch Netflix and you see, you know, you're like, man, that Charles Leclerc, I want to root for that guy, or that Carlos Sainz, or Yuki Tsunoda. Like, I want to know what he's doing.
But
so
I do think
Nick
Mercedes...
Nick DeVries's six pack is going to bring a lot more fans in than fucking Cadillac.
No, but I will say that having, like, seeing Ferrari, seeing, you know, Mercedes, seeing these, it adds legitimacy to the sport.
100%. Yeah,
it was all Williams and Haas, you'd be like, what the fuck am I even looking at? To a new fan. But I will say, so to that effect, because I know that I think a lot of the criticism is like, will this be a works team or a factory team, or will this be just a badge team like Alfa Romeo? And my question is, from a viewership money perspective, who gives a shit whether Cadillac supplies an engine or not? They just care about I don't get why people are getting hung up like, well, will Cadillac supply an engine?
Yeah, because that's more something that people at board level should be worried about. Like F1 should be having that conversation. But for fans, I don't think it makes a massive amount of difference. The only way it makes a difference is if it is just a badge. If it is just Cadillac saying, we're paying you X amount of money and you can run our name on the car, then Andretti has to find, it has to find a proper manufacturer, it has to find supply in a different way. And then you're talking about the health of A, that team, but B, the grid as well. So I think that's why that's important. But for I think a lot of fans are using that as an excuse, because like you say, it doesn't really affect your viewing experience on a Sunday. But I think what it does do is it raises questions about the legitimacy of their bid. I think a few years back, so between 2010 and 2016, it was pretty common to have whoever was finishing 10th or 9th. Well, actually back then, it was kind of 12th, 11th.
Yeah.
You would always hear stories of, hey, these guys are about, they might make the next race, maybe 2, and then they're done. They were surviving race to race. And it wasn't healthy at all, because you basically, you had all these teams competing against each other, and yet the team at the back was barely able to survive. That's, there's a lot of reasons that led to the cost cap, but that was one of them. It was like, we need to kind of stop this imbalance. So I think that the biggest question around the badging of Cadillac is around that. Is this entry going to come in? Is it going to support itself? And if Cadillac comes in as an engine supplier, that's incredibly good for Formula One, because suddenly, Mercedes currently has a lot of teams it supplies to. One of those go to Cadillac? Not only does it kind of limit the political power of Mercedes, but it means that you've got instead of one, Mercedes supplying 4 teams, it now supplies obviously its own team and one other team, 2 other teams. A team like Williams can be like, well, we're now the second engine kind of recipient, rather than, hey, we're one of 4, we're one of 2. And from a Williams perspective, you might look at that and say, well, that's actually much better for us. We get so it gets complicated the more you pull up the string of it. But basically, I think that's what's going to make or break the Andretti bid, is actually whether Cadillac is willing to come all in, or is it actually kind of just being like, we want to be on the car, but you guys work the rest out. And I'm not sure that, I don't think the Formula One teams think that the Andretti operation has the money or the resources to pull that off on their own, if that makes sense. So I think currently that's where the kind of the impasse is.
I mean, I think that as a fan, I think that it is interesting to me too, because there's some level when you look at Mercedes just gives, supplies engines for Williams and for Aston Martin and these various places where I'm like, oh, well, it just feels like there's 3 engines. There's basically 3 engines on the grid.
Yeah.
And, or 4, I guess, Renault and Honda as well. But I think that would add, as a fan, being like, oh, that's that Cadillac engine is on another level, or that engine that Andretti is making is on another level.
And for a healthier sport, I guess
it makes it more competitive as well. You've got, instead of it being like, oh, this track really suits the Mercedes. I mean, it's not so pronounced now, but at the beginning of the V6s, you would literally have races where it's like, well, the top 8 teams are Mercedes. Then it's then it's the Renault teams, and then Ferrari might be beneath that. It's not as bad as that now, but when there's only 3, you're right. It's more difficult to kind of have that difference and have more teams competing for different things. So
I mean, are they just using this Andretti thing as I mean, are they really? Is there any team that they would be like, yes, fuck yeah, I want to split my prize money with these guys, or are they just going to make excuses for any fucking team?
I think. I think they'd make excuses at this point, because there's no obvious if they came in, I mean, I was trying to think this the other day. I was like, let's say Elon Musk turned around tomorrow and said, I want to buy an F1 team. I want to put Tesla on. Let's say, obviously a completely ridiculous idea, but let's just say he's like, I want to put more
ridiculous things have happened with him.
I think that he can figure. I think he can figure something out. Yeah.
He's put shit in space. He's bought Twitter. So.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get into the mind of Elon Musk.
He put a Twitter poll, should I make an F1 team? And based off of the Twitter poll, he'll just do it. So that's kind of his vibe.
And I was thinking, even in that situation, would F1 turn around and say, yeah, no, definitely? Because, he's bringing money in, but is his project valid? And also, just because he's coming in with a big fancy new team, those teams still have to, especially Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari, they still have to go to the people that run those teams and say, right, we're going to get less money next year. And it's expensive. As we saw with Red Bull, they were operating right on the cusp of that budget cap. The teams are going to be close to it again this year. You're suddenly saying you're getting less money in, and we're in the economic environment that we are in right now as well. It becomes a really difficult sell. So I don't think there is a team that teams would say no. Yep.
But all their criticisms about Andretti, a Tesla team would not have. Right? It would have the money. It would probably have the infrastructure. It would have the. So they wouldn't be able to make any of those. It's just they don't want an 11th team. They don't want to share the money. It's probably just a cynical ploy to just. There is an 11th team that they would want.
Yeah, it seems like that at the moment, and I'm wondering what Formula One for so many years has been about compromise and about finding. These guys want this, we want this, so let's find the middle ground. Again, Bernie was so good at doing that. He would always find the compromise. He'd say, Ferrari would threaten to quit every 3 years, and he'd say, right, what do you guys want? We're not going to give you exactly that, but here's kind of a watered down version. And Ferrari would say, they'd say, see, we're good now with that.
Right.
Okay, I have one more dumb question about this. Who, other than dumbass fans like me who just wants to see more cars and more drivers get a chance, who actually wants an 11th team on the grid? Why does the FIA want an 11th car? Who actually wants this?
Mm-hmm.
Other than Michael Andretti, apparently, really bad.
Andretti's going to stop at nothing. Well, Colton Herta as well is probably a second one. Would want it. I think that if you're the FIA, you're looking at F1 right now, and all those things you mentioned do come into it. They're like, we want more young drivers going into the sport.
Yeah.
You know, we want more. I think there's always been this kind of obsession with how many manufacturers are involved in racing. You know, the more you have, the healthier you look. And, you know, if you get them involved in Formula One, can you then get those teams interested in going across to other FIA series? You know, are they bringing drivers across? You know, I think they look at the whole FIA ecosystem there and they say, if Cadillac isn't involved at all anywhere around here, I mean, you know, they've obviously got racing projects, all these manufacturers do, but if we can get them into Formula One, how much of that's going to trickle down? The money they're going to bring in, you know, are they going to become a big player in it? Are they going to commit themselves to the next 30 years? Because as well, like, let's say Ferrari did decide, hey, we want to quit, but actually you've established that Cadillac is the new big player and they've become the big team. If you're the FAA, you're like, okay, it's a blow we're losing Ferrari, but thank God Cadillac came in when they did, because now, you know, they've got the brand, they've got the resources, they've got the facility. So I think it's just completely long-term thinking. You know, it's like, how can we future-proof the sport as much as possible? And the more manufacturers you have coming in, that manufacturer's it's very rare, unless you're Honda, I guess, to come into a sport and quit very, very quickly. You know, Honda's always kind of had those knee-jerk reactions to things. Was really, even Renault, you know, look, when they came in, they said, well, we're going to win a championship eventually. They've rebranded, but they've stuck with it, whether or not they can win what they want to do. But Renault didn't just come in to win they didn't come back in 2016 to win in 2018. They were like, we want to win long-term into the future. And if you're the FAA, you're like, hey, these guys are now committing. It's like if to go back to the NFL cities thing, if Seattle had said, hey, yeah, we want an NFL team, and we want to sign a 5-year
team in this case, because
right. Sorry, I was trying to work out when the Seahawks came to be, but I wasn't sure. But if there was any doubt that, hey, these guys only really want to be around for 5 years, the question would be, are they benefiting the league in any way? And you look at teams like Williams,
owner just going to move them somewhere shitty.
Yeah, right.
You know
Which I'm not sure what the equivalent of that would be in Formula One. That'd be quite interesting. Moving Ferrari to America would be a big story. That'd be great. So I think hopefully that answered the question, because I think ultimately a brand like Cadillac coming in, you're basically, it's a great news story of saying, look, Formula One's so great right now. We've got people coming in. One of the things when you look at Formula E in the past few years, all those manufacturers have been leaving. It looks like it's a ship sinking a little bit. You know, you see all these manufacturers say, actually, we signed up for Formula E. We don't think what we signed up for is what we have currently. We can't commit to it long term. It just looks like things are falling apart. So if you're bringing in a Cadillac, you're bringing in, you know, there's rumors of Ford, you know, looking at Formula One as well. There's obviously Porsche coming in. You're suddenly saying, like, look, we're so great right now. All these names that you recognize, that you see on the roads, these companies that are renowned for building cars, they all want to be part of this as well. So I think it's just about growing what you have and making sure it's still there in 10, 15 years, as strong as it is now.
I think moving away from this a little bit, but keeping on to the idea of, like, with the finances, it's such an expensive sport. It's a sport that where teams were like, they say, like, this is like, you don't go to Formula One to make money. It's that you go and you lose money doing Formula One. But now with the new popularity, with the new brand deals, with Vegas, with the American influence after Drive to Survive, and now with the cost cap, even though I'm curious to hear what the cost cap actually, like, are these teams really not spending the $400 million anymore? But first, are the teams starting to actually become profitable? Because I think I've heard some people kind of talk about that like a team like a Haas or something like on the bottom skirts can actually, like, not just be, like, hemorrhaging money anymore. Is that true?
Yeah, it is. And you may have seen when Haas introduced MoneyGram joining, one of the things Gunther Steiner said was, he was like, well, now we can actually spend up at that level. You know, we can actually do that. And they can do that without the fear of, like, well, actually, can we afford to do this? It's like, no, we have that money. And like you said, the piece of the pie is the same. You know, they've still got 1/10 of it, but that pie is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So the money coming into them is much bigger. I think that's having a bigger impact on a team like Haas, a team like Williams, than it might do at Red Bull or at Mercedes. And again, that as well, that's something I meant to mention earlier. That's also another reason for the reluctance to add an 11th team. You know, if you're Haas, you're looking at it and you're like, you know, we've been here 7, 8 years, whatever it is now. Yeah. We've struggled for a few years to stay here, to be competitive. do we just want this team joining now the going's good and kind of jumping in on what we've helped to create? So I think there is that feeling as well in the paddock, which
Us
is, you know,
helping to
massively.
create this.
Well,
Yeah, right.
Gunther Steiner helped. to
Gunther
create it.
Steiner did help to
Yeah.
create this brand. It's true.
Yeah, true.
But
So-
Haas, the motorsport team, didn't really do much.
No, I mean, no one's there. Like, I'm glad, because, you know, Gene Haas, obviously, it's kind of motor tools, isn't it? It's automation. It's all of his machine tools that he's promoting.
Yeah.
I don't think they've really done anything either way for Formula One.
Right.
But I think that the feeling there
Haas
would
is
be
like the Cadillac coming in off the sweat of our backs. You know?
the sweat of that would be a funny. I'd love to see Gunther Steiner saying that, because it would be ridiculous, but also quite entertaining.
No, but
hearing
it is
from him.
true that his personality has added to, like, the only reason I see Haas hats in America now, and it's literally
Same, yeah.
It's not because they're doing well; it's because of him.
I see one right here on this show.
Yeah. But about the cost cap. So this $150 million, is that like really what these teams are? It's like, it used to be for, like, you know, in 2019, 2017, whatever, they were spending like $400+ million. Are they really only spending $150 million, or is it this kind of like, you know, accounting where it's like, well, on this thing, these are the things that are like, this is the stuff that you can spend the money on the cost cap on, but like, is Red Bull and Mercedes and Ferrari really spending basically a third of their previous budgets with this?
That's always been the big question. And I think it was the biggest criticism when it came in, was how are you going to police a team like Mercedes or McLaren or Red Bull? You know, how do you know they're spending exactly what they say they're spending just on Formula One? I mean, Christian Horner joked to us time and time again last year. He said the biggest department now at Red Bull is our accounting department. And the joke he was making was like, because we're trying to stay in the cap, but you could read between the lines there and say, well, you've also probably got some people there trying to work out, well, how do we make sure we're still spending money? And this isn't an accusation about Red Bull. I think all the top teams will have looked at this, like, how are we going to get everything we want to spend within the cap, but still find ways, you know, around that? Are we going to find loopholes?
Also, I
don't think.
Also, if you have an engine, isn't that not count against the cap? So you could if you put something in power unit.
Well, yeah. So you still have to get that.
Couldn't you spend $100 million in your power unit?
Well, it has to be for those exemptions are given for things like, you know, you're like, we have to make this. This is like if we don't have this, the engine could blow up in the car next week and it won't be safe. So if you can prove stuff like that, you know, if you're making a reliability change. So like, you know, Alpha would have had certain concessions made when Guan Yu Zhou had that crash, but that still would have been massively expensive, because that's one thing Horner said when Verstappen and Hamilton had that crash. He said, you know, we had to rebuild an entire chassis. It was a big chunk out of their budget cap for 21. So these teams are struggling. You know, Red Bull, you could really tell Red Bull, Mercedes, they're the teams that felt like they had to do the most to kind of bring themselves down to that, you know. And I think that one of the reasons it didn't go lower was because those teams said, if you bring this any lower, we're literally just going to have to be firing people left, right, and center. And ultimately, F1 was like, well, we don't want to be making people unemployed. So I think, you know, the cost cap overspend that Red Bull had, a lot of that seemed procedural at the end of the day when it came down to it. But clearly they've struggled more than any other team to fit everything they do into that package, you know, into that number. And I think it always has a knockover effect. I mean, there's suggestions that teams are already right on the limit of what they should be spending, or so were on the limit of what they should be spending at the end of last year.
Right.
So
I think Horner said that like multiple teams. I think Horner said that like multiple teams are going to be over the budget this year.
That's what he said, and he actually called it. He said he was like, I think he was talking in kind of, I think it may have been Miami, because I remember I was in the media session and I was sweating an ungodly amount, and that could only have been in Miami this year.
Miami,
it was so warm.
yeah, sure.
And he said, you know, the budget cap is going to repeatedly be an issue, because we're basically, so I think, if I'm trying to remember the exact number, but there was something like the spreadsheet that Red Bull gave the FIA was something like 160,000 pages of an Excel document. So that's per team. Imagine that accounting job. So you have this fascinating situation now with the cost cap, is our teams finding ways to spend around it, or our teams simply not actually, you know, they're just making mistakes when it comes to procedure, which is kind of what Red Bull did, what Aston did. I mean, Red Bull did overspend. You know, they went over, and they, you know, that amount, what was it? It was just under 2% or whatever it was. So clearly there's overspends happening, whether they're intentional overspends, whether they're kind of we'll do this, and we'll see what the penalty is. I don't know. I don't want to, be the judge of that. But I think one thing that people said was they looked at Red Bull's penalty and they said, is it now worth intentionally overspending?
Right.
If you know that's the penalty you're going to get.
Right.
Hashtag worth it.
And I'm not sure if it is. I think that from what I've spoken to people at the FIA about this, I've said, how can you be sure that they're not spending out, that teams aren't finding clever ways to do this? And I think that's been one of the biggest. It's been a growing, it's been a learning curve for the FIA, because they've suddenly had to basically audit 10 teams, but not just at one point. They've had to be keeping tabs on them throughout the year, and they've been pretty confident that those things haven't been going on. But obviously all the teams are constantly, Mercedes are constantly looking across at Red Bull and Ferrari, and they're like, where'd that come from? Where's that from? Right. And you heard Ferrari and Mercedes both saying, well, we couldn't have matched that level of development last year. And you're like, well, true, but maybe Red Bull found a way. You just don't know. So I don't want to be the guy that says they're definitely all overspending, because ultimately, if that doesn't come out from the FIA, who are the guys ultimately looking over every single bit of it, we don't know. I'd like to think they're not, but last year kind of filled me with some doubts, I guess.
Who's your favorite person? You said you were like in the media, in like the bullpen. In terms of the people that you've had to deal with, like who's fun to talk to, who's a pain to talk to, who's like doesn't give you shit, is Christian? I'm getting the vibe that you like Red Bull and you like Christian, but am I wrong? I
find Christian interesting when you talk to him. I like the fact that he is the way he is. I know he's kind of the super villain of F1, but he's such a character. And I think that, Christian he's always fascinating. He will always give you a quote. I think he's always very good at, he'll go into a press session and he's very smart at, he's like, this is what I want to talk about. This is what I want the media to go away from this talking about. And I think he could go into politics. I think Christian Horner, he's got that kind of way about him. I don't think I like Red Bull over other teams, but I certainly, I've enjoyed the difference in culture between them and Mercedes. Horner, actually, this might go down badly on your podcast, but has always been massively reasonable to me, polite, says hello. So to me, he's never been that super villain that he comes across on TV. Easy to deal with. Danny Rick is great. Danny Rick's always been great. I get on well with Kevin Magnussen. He's a guy I've spoken to because obviously the Haas connection, ESPN, we've always talked there. If you ask Kevin a bad question, he'll kind of look at you and laugh and say, "Come on, man! Like, what are you doing?" And I respect that about him. He'll kind of say it as it is. And a lot of the young guys, Lando's always pretty good. Gives good answers. Max with us is usually pretty good. He can get punchy in those bigger press conferences, but when we talk a lot to these guys in kind of small huddles and stuff like that. I think once he gets to know you. And I've got quite a memorable face, big round head, beard, bald head. I think he looks and he's like, okay, I know who this guy is. And Lewis is fantastic as well. Just always gives great answers, and that's basically what our business is about. In terms of less good, I find Stroll very difficult.
Well, okay. Which one? Both of them?
Both. I do find both difficult. Lance comes across on camera how he is with us. He kind of, I've always thought he makes driving an F1 car sound like he's filling out a tax return. He speaks about it with the same enthusiasm as that, which is fine. Like, he's allowed to do that, but he kind of, he's the only driver that I feel, and this is just my personal take from speaking to him, but he's the only driver you feel that is genuinely maybe looking down his nose at you and thinking, I'm better than this person. And maybe that's to do with upbringing. Maybe it's just my take. I might be completely wrong. He might just not like me, which has happened in the past with different drivers. And when he first started out, me and a few other journalists, we would ask a lot, like, does the pay driver thing annoy you? Does the fact that you're driving for your dad's team annoy you? And he didn't tell us whether that annoyed him, but clearly the questions that
would annoy me, probably.
Yeah, and I think that I remember having a conversation with his press officer. And I was like, what I'm trying to get at is, do you feel like, because I think he just had a podium when I was asking him this, and I was like, it feels like you've done enough in F1 to show that you can race. He's had that. He should have won that race when Lewis won the 7th championship. Was that Turkey? I think it was, when he had pole led. So I was like, the guy's shown he can race, and that obviously I think he's quite fluctuating in his form. So I probably asked the question badly, but I think Stroll's probably the one that stands out. as difficult. But to be honest with you, I mean, even then, there's some journalists who I speak to, and they've had nothing but good experiences with him. So a lot of it comes down to subjective, and there'll probably be people listening to this being like, "I don't like this English guy," so I feel like he's probably asking difficult
There's
questions.
nobody that's going to take
Yeah.
Stroll's side against your side on this podcast. I don't
among
think.
our
among our listeners.
Yeah, I think so.
What's Alonso like?
Oh, Alonso is probably my favorite person in Formula One.
Yeah.
I'm not just saying that, Matt, because you have the hat on either. I'm saying that because I think Alonso. I grew up as a huge wrestling fan in the 90s. WWF as it was called then.
Yeah, like where this is going.
Yeah.
Fernando Alonso would have fit right in as a heel in the Attitude Era. He would have been up there. Him and Austin would have headlined like 3 WrestleManias together. It would have been the good guy.
Vibes.
Yeah, right. I think the thing with Alonso is he knows how good he is. He knows he should be winning the titles that Hamilton has, the titles Max is now.
Yes.
And you never know with Fernando. You always, when you hear Fernando talk, you're like, is he playing me here? And usually he is. Usually he'll say something to you in an interview, and then he'll word it differently to a TV reporter outside and give the other answer. Or 2 weeks later, like he did it a few times this year when he would slag off Lewis on the radio. He would say, I can't remember what it was in Belgium. He said
he only knows how to drive.
He knows how to drive from the lead.
From the back. Yeah. And then there was something later in the year, wasn't there, when he said
some championships are more legitimate than others.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, he basically twice, one of them in the heat of the moment. So you say, fair enough, you given the benefit of the doubt, he did say it after they just collided. The second one was very much a sit down interview. In both of them, his response was basically, the British media are just taking this out. The British speaking media is taking. It's like, dude, you said it. Like you said those things. And I don't know. I've always got the vibe from Fernando that there's kind of an element of thinking he's the smartest guy in the room a lot of the time. And I'm not sure and I'm not dissing his intelligence level, but it's not always the case. He's made a lot of career mistakes in terms of where he's gone and what he's done at different times.
Yes.
So I think
Matt, let him speak.
So I think I actually massively rate him as a driver. I think it's him, Lewis, and Max far above everyone else. And then you've got second tier right now.
Yes.
But him as a person is just so compelling. When he was with Stoffel Vandoorne as teammate at McLaren, he basically would start every question by being like, every answer. You say, you finished 11th today, wasn't great. He's like, yeah, well, my teammate, who's the greatest GP2 champion of all time, could only manage 18th. And here I am in 11th. How great could I be? And that was every week. And by the end, it was like, dude, just stop. You know that Simpsons meme where it's like, stop, he's already dead. Like, dude,
he murdered him. He's done.
Yeah, it's like we get it. We get it. You're ruining Vandoorne's career. Like, you don't have to keep telling us. But he was using it as like a look how good I am type thing. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because I would rather 10 Alonsos like that than 10 really well media trained guys that don't say anything. I think it's why he's so popular. But I don't know. I mean, what's your take? I'm not sure.
Well, Matt would drink his bathwater.
My takes on this are well known to our audience. We don't need to get into how he's my favorite person in the world. But what do we think about? You talk about him making awful decisions.
Yeah.
How do we rate this move to Aston Martin?
Yeah.
Is that going to go down as another awful decision?
I'm not sure if it'll go down as an awful decision, because we'll have to see. Aston are throwing a lot of money, at what Lawrence Stroll really wants to win. I'm not sure whether
that's going
to happen over 3 years.
Does he want Alonso to win?
Well, this is so another thing that was fascinating last year. Do you remember when Stroll basically nearly catapulted Alonso into the middle?
We were at that race.
Tried and failed.
Tried and failed.
So we were at Austin this year.
Yeah.
Bear in mind how Alonso had responded when Lewis and him had a clumsy collision together, which was Lewis's fault. Right. But they'd had a clumsy collision together. Clearly was Lewis's fault.
Yeah.
And he'd said what he said about a guy that at the very least is in the picture of being the greatest driver of all time.
Yes.
When Stroll could have seriously injured him, he came back and was like, "Nah, racing incident. I think that's fine." And it's like the guy's already trying to keep the Strolls. He's trying to keep the Strolls happy. And that's the funny thing. If that move wasn't happening, he would have absolutely eviscerated Lance Stroll in his media reporting. But he's smart enough to know that, hey, that's not gonna work for me right now. I think as much as Lawrence Stroll might want Lance to beat Fernando, I don't see a point where they're going to be able to make that happen on track because Alonso is just so much better than most drivers on the grid.
Yeah.
As for the Aston Martin move, I liked it, but it shows you how many bridges he's burnt in his career because that's really the only place he could have gone after Alpine. Mercedes don't want anything to do with him. Red Bull didn't want to sign him. They had a few chances too. Ferrari have said no chance we're getting him back. And then beyond that, it's like, what do you right now? Do you want to drive for another team? McLaren, I don't think he'd go back there either.
Well, you never thought he'd go back to McLaren, and he did. So
that's true. That's true.
And blackmail them and cost them over $100 million.
Yeah, right. It was amazing that Ron Dennis came back and said, "Yeah, fine. You know, we'll let bygones be bygones." There. But that was interesting as well. That whole thing because the reason what led to Vettel's move away from Ferrari in 2015 was Alonso kind of trying to play two teams against each other, McLaren and Ferrari, for his services. And then because Vettel had done so badly at Red Bull that year, had triggered performance clauses in his contract, had gone and spoken to Ferrari and they'd said, fine, yeah, we'll sign you because Alonso's kind of playing us around. They got to Suzuka that year and Fernando was like, wait a minute, what? You've signed who? So where do I go? And suddenly McLaren was his only option. So it's kind of like he was like, okay, well, I'll play nice now. I have to go back there. And it seemed like he would have gone there anyway, but it was just a great example of him thinking, I'm controlling this narrative, the situation. And actually, he kind of made a bit of a mess of it. But that's just my take looking at it.
In life, when he thinks he's playing chess.
Right, yeah. He thought Queen's Gambit was about checkers, but he didn't understand it was about chess.
Yeah.
So we talked about like the storylines this season going forward with this season, things to look out for, both whether it be like the situation at Aston, if they can really the tensions between Alonso and Stroll, like we talked about the tensions between the FIA and F1 and Christian Horner and Mohammed Ben Sulayem. What are you looking forward to this year? Like what do you have your eye on in terms of like where do you see the potential like landmines going off this year?
Landmines, I think a big one is Hamilton v Russell. I think if Mercedes does make that step forward, I think it's been very there is a real respect there between them, but naturally if they're up there with Red Bull, suddenly you have as we saw at Red Bull, drivers hate team orders. They hate being told, let the other guy through. And imagine if Russell is quicker in a race, you're saying to Lewis, like, hey, let's keep this 1-2 position. I can see that potentially getting a bit messy. I can see some moments where, those two guys take shots at each other, even if the respect stays there. But I think that's going to be fascinating. And Mercedes is going to have to manage that if they are competitive.
They haven't historically managed them at all.
Well, that's it, isn't it? Yeah, Lewis when he was with Rosberg, and then with Bottas, never really had to. It was never really an issue because Bottas, but Russell is just such a talented young driver that I think it's a different environment. And Lewis, we know how good Lewis is, right? But the two of them, the one thing that I don't think they're going to want to do is give the other guy, help. I think it's when you look at Max and Checo, Max clearly knows he's a better driver than Checo is. I think Checo's great, but Max is clearly better. George could, if he wins a few more races at the start of the year, you're like, well, this guy's as good a driver as we've seen in a top team for a long time.
Yeah.
So that's a big one.
What was this? I forgot there was a time where they were right next to each other, and forgot how this played out. But George is like, what do we do? Are we racing or what? Like,
yeah.
That's right. There was an attitude of like, what the fuck are we doing?
Yeah.
That's right. And right. And I remember the incident, but I can't remember the race. And he sounded like a guy that was like hinting, we should be racing here.
Yeah.
Through. And interestingly, I remember that happening with Ricciardo and Vettel in 2014. Ricciardo in one of the early races was like, what are we doing here, guys?
Yeah.
When he was sat behind Vettel and he was basically saying, let me through. I think talking of Ricciardo, I think the form of Perez is going to just be a storyline all season. They've got Ricciardo there now.
Okay, so we have a lot of delusional DR fans here. Tell us.
Is that possible?
Is that possible? If Checo is, let's say Checo, because Checo had that spike in form in the beginning, and then they, according to all the Checo fans, they developed a car away from him, and completely not his fault, and it was corrupt and all this and all that. That's fine. Maybe there's some truth to that. But if Checo is struggling, and I mean, how bad is the vibe there? First of all, that you're picking.
To be honest with you, the vibe. Red Bull are always very good at kind of hiding a lot of those things. I don't mean that in a
not at the end of the year.
But no, but like Ferrari was kind of always out there. It's like, oh wow, look how bad things are. Whereas Red Bull, I think, have always been good at, they're like, we'll talk about this quickly, then we'll go out to face the media. After Brazil, they were like, no, there's no issue. No, the Monaco thing's not a thing. They were all on point with it really impressively, and it's quite frustrating because it's like, man, like these guys have really closed up shop on it. I think Checo was he was pissed. I think he was, and I have colleagues at ESPN Mexico who said the same thing. There was, they genuinely left Brazil very, very pissed off. But ultimately, what's he going to do? Max is the better driver of the two of them. He's a world-class driver, probably is going to end up as one of the greats of all time. And Perez has put himself into a great position, but also kind of a frustrating position in that he's been so good as that second driver. He's been competitive. He's won races when Max hasn't, has maybe had some bad moments. He was probably a better driver than Max at about 3 or 4 races last year, which is something that Albon and Gasly could never really say. When they were there, they struggled so much. So I think Perez has put himself in a position where he's become so good that he's clearly never going to be the guy that gets the favor, in terms of those moments, because I think Max is just going to be ahead of him. So for him to lose the seat, I think he'd have to have a massive downturn in form. I think he's exactly what Red Bull want in that seat. He's competitive. He's quick. He puts up fights against Lewis like he did in Abu Dhabi and Qatar in 21, but he did it throughout 22 as well. And I think that the question when it comes to Danny Rick is what Danny Rick are you getting? If you do want to get rid of Perez, are you getting the Danny Rick of 2018, or are you going to get the Danny Rick of the last 2 years?
Okay.
And I think there's no way of knowing really. And I think that's
can they figure that out in the sim? Can he get some time? Can he get a few test sessions and they can kind of suss that out, or not really?
I don't think his deal is going to allow them to have that big of a look at him. It's a handful of sim sessions, but really it's more of a brand ambassador thing. A lot of this year away for Danny Rick seems to be kind of a mental, I want to get away for a bit and just, I think like rediscover his love for Formula One. I don't think it's where Red Bull are going to turn around and say, have you seen how quick Ricciardo is in the sim? And it's not like the old days of F1 either, where you would, over summer, you'd be like, let's go have 3 days of testing, just thrashing cars around a circuit for 3 days and see who's better.
So if Checo gets COVID, let's say, God forbid, Checo gets sick, Checo has appendicitis like an Albon situation, God forbid. Who actually is going to fill in there, do you think?
Yeah, so because it's a weird one, isn't it? Because reserve driver, they were like, is officially Liam Lawson still.
Oh, I see.
But I think Danny Rick would step in. I think it would be, especially if let's consider where the championship might be.
Right. If it's an important race,
yeah, like Liam Lawson, incredibly talented guy, like exciting driver, but he's basically learning on the fly an F1 car, and he's stepping into a potentially race-winning car. Danny Rick's still doing that, but he's got however many races experience. He's won 8 races.
Right.
So I think he would get the nod if he was there as well. There's some races he won't be at, but he can still be flown out to a race like we've seen in the past with some drivers. So I don't know. It's a great thing for them to have, and maybe it puts Perez under a bit of pressure. But I think ultimately, to me, it shows you that the Red Bull driver program is actually as weak as it's been for a long time. You've got Max, you've got Checo, you've got Lawson there, but really, who are the next big guys? There was always someone obvious on the horizon for them.
Yuki Tsunoda, obviously.
Yeah, Yuki, but Yuki's kind of in that weird. I love Yuki. I think he's fantastic, but this year seems so key for him. So so we'll see. It's other storylines though. There was one that I was thinking of this morning, and now it's completely gone from my head. I can't think what it is. I mean, Ferrari is always a storyline, isn't it? Every year,
Obviously.
Are Ferrari going to implode? But I'm fascinated.
Would you have fired him? Would you have fired him?
I don't think I would, purely because I think obviously Binotto has set up a situation where the team was able to come back. Like he put everything in place for them to master that 2022 rule change. And I think the problems are big, but is changing the guy at the very top the answer? I think there's clearly just operational issues and stuff like that.
But was the trust gone with Leclerc?
I think the Leclerc issue ultimately is probably what pushed it over the edge, and the fact that Binotto's never really been seen as somebody who's in favor with the big guns at Ferrari. But ultimately, you look at the two most successful teams in F1, Red Bull and Mercedes, right now anyway, Red Bull and Mercedes, the two things they've got going for them is longevity. Horner's been there for 13 years. Well, it's probably longer than that, actually. 15, 16 years. Wolff was there with Lauda, obviously has been at the helm of the team for so long. And, Horner from 2014 until 2020, Red Bull were doing terribly, but they never once said, we're going to get rid of Horner. They were like, no, we've got a culture here. We're buying into the bigger picture. We'll get there. we'll get there. We have the people in place. We trust the personnel. So when it first happened, I was like, it makes sense. I completely understood why they did it. And I think Fred Vasseur is a good replacement, but I think the problems are bigger than just one man, if that makes sense. How about you guys? Were you pro or anti?
I mean, I hated his vibe, and I hated the way he sort of was like, they would like fuck up something colossally, and he would be like, we just did not have the pace today. And it's like, you had the pace.
It wasn't the issue wasn't the pace, or ultimately you could, but he obfuscated from questions. He didn't take responsibility. And for all of Christian Horner's whatever, there can be a vibe like when he's like, we fucked it up today. And so same with Toto. This year, Toto was like, we were terrible today. Like there's leadership qualities that are just inherent to like that a monkey could see, kind of thing.
Yeah. Gaslighting everybody, saying they were never going to win anyway because their car wasn't fast enough. It's just
that really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And I think just to close off this point, because I don't know whether I think we've massively overrun maybe, so sorry for
you're
thanks to people that are still listening, but I think that was the one thing I noticed with Ferrari is culture. Is when Mercedes make a mistake. And Binotto said one of the things that really not infuriated me, but I just couldn't understand it. He said, you guys don't criticize Mercedes and Red Bull when they make the same mistakes. And I was kind of like, well, we do. And the thing is that when they make them, they usually come back a much better team. When Mercedes make mistakes, they, like you were saying, like they'll say, hey, we really effed up today. Ferrari were like, no, we didn't mess up, even though we sent Leclerc out on dry tires in the rain. That wasn't our fault. That was the rain. That was the rain. That was the rain. It's like, guys, just admit you made a mistake. Like, it's fine if you made a mistake. Just tell people how
those teams rarely make the same mistake twice, and Ferrari made the same mistake seemingly like over and over and over again this year.
And again, when it comes to Binotto, like that there does have to be accountability. So I totally get the firing, but I'm just not sure whether it's actually going to solve anything in the long run, if that makes sense. So
I think we also come from like American sports culture where it's like if the coach fucked up this colossally, like they're fucking out of there. But I think it is a bigger
job, and he did build a fast car. But I mean, he was so toxic, his whole vibe.
And that weird thing at Silverstone when he was like pointing at Leclerc. I just that to me was just a real snapshot of their season of kind of like.
Yeah, I don't know what. So. Yeah, it was hard to. He seemed like he could build a good car, but he didn't have the sort of interpersonal skills to engender sort of trust. So this FTX thing happens. Where are the rest? Where are the rest of the cars? I mean, are we just going to roll out? Okay, so Mercedes is dropping that sponsor. Is everybody else good with their guys,
with their respective crypto sponsors?
So when I think this shows you where we're at with crypto in the world is when I asked other teams about it, they were like, no, we're fine. We're not with FTX. It's like, have you not checked the market recently? Like it's volatile. It's beyond volatile. It could happen to any of them. And I think that, I mean, Mercedes they were blown away when that happened. They went to bed one night with, a great sponsor on the car. The next day they didn't have it. Right. And you look across the grid, it used to be obviously tobacco sponsorships. It's now crypto. So yeah. I think publicly they're putting on a brave face, a lot of teams about it, but I think there's probably been, I know one team in particular has done a lot of like insight a lot of a big deep dive into like, we have a very big crypto partner. Is this sustainable going forward? And if it's not, how the hell do we kind of make sure that if it does go where FTX went, how do we make sure that, we're not just suddenly left in that situation? I think for Mercedes, it hurt them, but it's not like it was the end of the world for them. If it happens to a team maybe a bit lower down, you're in a bit more trouble.
Well, it's a financial hit for sure, but it's also just a branding. It's a PR nightmare that you associate yourself with a scam.
Yeah, big time. And suddenly, and then suddenly you look like a foolish brand, don't you? So like Mercedes was mentioned in all of these things with your Brady's, your Matt Damons, who actively took part in kind of pushing it. Whereas really Mercedes were like, well, we only put the thing on the car, but still, it's like, well, you still bought into it like everybody else did. So yeah,
that's
I think
Haas's job. To
I think Haas. It was nice to see another team actually just having an absolute nightmare with a sponsor that wasn't Haas, because Haas just seems, bless them, like hopefully MoneyGram are the future for them, because I think if they had a third one, I think half the team would be like, I'm done. I can't keep doing this. But yeah, I think
MoneyGram like your father's Venmo, like it's like a pretty weird company.
Yeah, I'd not heard about it. It's until about a week before, it was
Yeah.
public, and I think that's the best description I've heard of it. Your dad's Venmo is
Venmo
is
for
the
your
best
dad.
word.
Okay.
So hey, hopefully it works out for Haas. But yeah, it's not maybe the sexiest sponsor you could put on the car, but if it's bringing them the money, hopefully that kind of makes up for that, I guess.
Any funny stories from the track this year you'd like to share?
I've got an Alonso one. I've got a good Alonso one.
Yes, there we go.
That's what I actually wanted.
I was like anything you can think of, anything.
Anything that, 2 Alonso stories. I'm gonna tell my girlfriend to prepare a cold shower for me. Oh my.
So I remember one was, again, going back to Fernando, just for Matt's benefit here. I don't know if you remember, but in Spain, going into Spain, he came in kind of having to defend himself for making a lot of comments about the FIA and penalties he'd had in Miami.
Oh yes,
and we had the Thursday press conference and Fernando was kind of one of the guys front and center. That's when they're all in that big room and they're all talking together. He was asked about it. He was very critical. He said, "I don't know who's making these decisions." I think he called the FIA stewards like amateurs or something like that. Very, very bolshy kind of Fernando Alonso statement. Come out of that press conference. And I think there was a media session because basically half the drivers do the Thursday press conference. The other 10 do media sessions like with us and the TVs. So like they're not on like in the TV pen, not in the press conference. Right. I think I was going down to Haas or to Alpha for one of them, one of the sit down sessions. So I was walking past Alpine and I'm like, oh, who's Fernando talking to? And he's talking to Ben Sulayem. And I was the first one to notice. And Chris Medlin, one of my friends, who's a big guy, big name on Twitter, was there. And I was like, how long's that been going on? He's like, oh, like as soon as he came out, he was basically grabbed by him. And Fernando looked at us and like turned his back to us, and was like trying to hide his mouth as he spoke. And we were like trying to see. They were talking about it and stuff like that. He walked down the stairs afterwards, and we obviously were like, let's go ask this guy a question about what he said. And he just kind of looked at us and just like he just winked at me, as if to say, like, yeah, I've just basically managed this whole situation perfectly, like an absolute god. There was just the wink he gave me. It wasn't just at me. I think it was at the growing number of journalists that were there, because he was also like, "Hey, I'm not giving you a quote on this. Like, I'm absolutely not." And another one late on Alonso as well. I was walking from the motorhome to back to the media center. So you kind of go through. It's weird at Zandvoort. You kind of go from. You have to walk quite a little way to get there. And they were playing Max Super Max over the tannoy. Yeah. And Fernando Alonso came past me on a scooter and he was going, Max, Super Max, Max. And again, he had his eyes closed kind of on this scooter as he came down, and he stopped and saw me again. And I was looking at him laughing, and he just like nodded. And again, like it gave a little wink and was like, yeah. So I was like, if you've got any doubt about which side of the Max Lewis argument Fernando's on, that was it right there. And it was funny because I genuinely don't think he thought anyone would see him. But he was, Yes. So he was obviously loving the kind of Zandvoort vibe. Those are two that stand out, but I'm sure
that's amazing.
Sure
I think we can end right on those. That's exactly what Mac in his wildest dreams. That's.
I'm glad I can send Matt home happy at least. Like,
that's right. You definitely can.
I think I need to take a nap. I need to light up a cigarette and take a nap.
I'll keep a special eye on Alonso for you this year, man. If I ever come back on, we'll just talk Alonso stories.
You know what? I think if we get like $1 billion of funding, one day we'll just hire you away and you'll just be the Alonso correspondent.
I'd love to do that. Right. I think that would be the dream job beyond the dream job.
We should do a segment every week. Just call in and be like, so how's Alonso doing this week?
Hey, I mean, I'd love to do that. It gives me a reason to kind of he'll think this guy is stalking me. I keep seeing him at moments when I have to wink at the guy.
And you'll say, it's not me stalking you. It's actually this guy named Matt Ellis who lives in Los Angeles.
This weird guy with a podcast who has all your kimono and merchandise.
Keeping that company afloat, babe.
Wait, I mean, when I've gotten 2 products, they've smelled. I like wearing them, but out of the box they're wet and they smell weird.
Really? That's odd. I've never owned a Kimoa.
Once you dry them off and let the smell come off, they're very nice.
Do you think that's actual? Nice. That's just actual ode of Fernando that he puts.
Yeah, he wears all the he goes cycling in all the clothing before he sends it out.
Let's hope. Nate, this was an amazing interview. I mean, really terrible if you want to write a feature on us. I don't know how you're going to do that.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot I was interviing you guys. I forgot about that bit. Next time, I tell you what, if I can come back on, we'll.
We gotta have to have.
We want
you
it to be
next...
right. We want it to be right. It's not about when it comes out. We just want it when it comes out to be right. So
yeah, when it's
that's what matters most. Well, where can people find you?
Yep. So I write on ESPN.com/Formula One.
Heard of it?
Sorry, /F1.
Yeah,
you might have heard of it. Myself, I'm on at Nate Saunders F1. And yeah, I tweet, and you can feel free to go over there and abuse me for some of my takes on Formula One. But yeah, no, absolutely love being on, guys. Thanks so much for having me on.
So fun. Thank you so much.
We're gonna have you back.
So we enter the podcast. We say hello, Vankas, as inspired by Gunther Steiner. So could you give us a goodbye, Vankas?
Goodbye, Vankas.
Yeah.
How was that?
Goodbye, Vankas.
Goodbye.
Bye, Vankas.